Welcome, dear friends. Today I will tell you a story of love lost and found, of sacrifice and redemption, and of a mother's unwavering devotion that defied all odds. Enjoy watching. With a smile, Susan watched her son, Jacob, trying on his new suit. Tall, well-built, and dark-haired, her boy was getting married tomorrow. She could hardly believe it. Jacob closely examined his reflection in the mirror, then nodded in satisfaction. The suit fit him like a glove, a stylish little number. The young man turned to his mother. Great color, too, and it looks expensive. It cost a pretty penny, Susan thought, but said aloud, "I'm glad you like it. I'll definitely shed a tear when I see you all decked out at the wedding." At the wedding? Jacob finally tore himself away from the mirror. "Mom, were you planning on coming to the wedding or something? I thought we agreed you wouldn't be there." "Agreed? Honey, I thought you were joking." "What jokes?" Her son started pacing nervously around the room. "Have you forgotten what Ashley's parents are like? The wedding will be full of high society. You'll feel like a poor relation there. I'll be worried sick about you." "Mom, do you want to ruin such an important day for me?" Jacob sat down next to Susan on the couch, took her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Mom, just imagine how shabby you'll look next to those dolled-up ladies. My heart will break from such humiliation. Ashley and I will come by the next day, okay? We'll have some tea or champagne. You can congratulate us and give us your gift." Susan's heart clenched with hurt. Her own son was so ashamed of her that he was willing to look like an orphan at his own wedding. "Why would I look shabby?" his mother objected. "I made an appointment with a good hairstylist. I'll get a manicure and I'll wear a nice dress." "What nice dress? That old blue rag?" Jacob screeched and started pacing again. "Okay, listen up. If you don't understand the nice way, I'll put it to you straight. I don't want to see you at the wedding. I know it makes me a jerk, but I'm ashamed that my mother is a janitor. I don't want you looking like a bum and embarrassing me in front of Ashley's family. Got it?" Stunned by her son's confession, Susan couldn't say a word. Jacob silently picked up his backpack and garment bag with the suit and headed for the door. At the threshold, he stopped. "I'll say it again. Don't come to the ceremony. No one will be happy to see you there." Jacob left a few hours ago. Outside, dusk had fallen, but Susan was still sitting on the couch in a daze. The shock had even prevented her from crying. The tears came a little later, when she turned on the light and took out an old family photo album from the dresser. This album contained her entire simple life. The memories came crashing down on Susan with such force that it was hard to breathe. An old, tattered photograph. A blue-eyed 2-year-old girl looked intently into the camera. A motley little dress, clearly handed down. Next to her, a thin, strange-looking woman with an absent gaze and a silly smile. Even in the poor photo, it was clear the woman was drunk. Susan was 2.5 when her mother lost custody, and she disappeared from her daughter's life forever. As she grew up, the girl never even tried to find her wayward mother. What was the point? A group photo. 10-year-old Susan, with unruly golden curls, stood in the second row, third from the left. Life in the orphanage was no bed of roses. The institution where Susan was raised was a mirror image of the troubled orphanages from documentaries filmed in the wild 90s. The cooks stole food, the caretakers swore, and the director encouraged bullying among the older kids to keep discipline. 3 pretty waitresses posed coquettishly for the photographer on the steps of an establishment with a slightly crooked sign. After finishing school, Susan didn't overthink her career choice. She quickly found a job as a waitress at a roadside cafe with the telling name Highway Stop Cafe, a summer glade in the woods. A happy, laughing Susan wearing a large wreath of flowers and leaves sat on the green grass. A handsome, dark-haired young man in a matching wreath had his arm around her shoulders. So many years later, and Susan's heart still fluttered at the sight of this photo. She had been working at the roadside cafe for about a year when she met Mark. That summer morning, the cafe was unusually crowded. Susan rushed around the dining room with her tray, serving impatient customers. Suddenly, she tripped over nothing and spilled a glass of tomato juice all over the man sitting by the window. A bright red stain slowly spread across his light shirt. In horror, Susan was struck speechless. Clearly an expensive shirt. Before she could collect herself, the cafe owner, Steve, materialized at the table. He started fussing over the man and yelling at the poor waitress, threatening to fire her. "No need to get so worked up," the man chuckled and handed Susan his car keys. "I'm just heading to my parents' cabin. I have a clean t-shirt in my car. Could you bring me my backpack from the back seat?" "I'll get it myself, Mr. Benson." Steve snatched the keys from Susan's hand. "This klutz will probably break something in your car, too." Left alone with the customer, the frightened girl finally managed to apologize. "I'm so sorry. This has never happened before, I swear, and I'll compensate you for the damages." "Relax, it's no big deal," the man said. "By the way, what's your name?" "Susan. I'm Mark." He held out his hand. Tentatively shaking the stranger's hand in return, Susan looked into his face for the first time. An attractive man, tall and athletic, with slightly mischievous gray eyes and an easy, charming smile. A few weeks before Mark's trip abroad, Susan's phone rang in her apartment. "This is Richard Benson," a gruff male voice said. "I'm Mark's father. You need to break it off with my son before he leaves. Tell him you have another man. If you ignore me, you'll be sorry." And without waiting for a reply, he hung up. Susan was ready to give her life for Mark. How could she leave the man she loved so desperately? When her boyfriend flew to London, a whirlwind of events began swirling around Susan. Events she still recalls as a bad dream. Steve, bribed by the city mayor, suddenly accused the waitress of a major cash shortage and had her arrested. Susan was so shocked by her boss's betrayal that she didn't even bother with a solid legal defense when the case quickly went to trial. She had no doubt the truth would come out and the charges dropped. But the trial was a farce. The public defender assigned to her case practically slept through the proceedings. The prosecutor, however, tried his hardest. Each day, Susan expected Mark to show up and save her. But a friend said rumors were that the young man planned to continue his studies in England. Susan got 3 years. It was in prison that she learned she was pregnant. Susan endured unspeakable hardship during her time in the women's prison. It was a memory too painful to revisit. Overwhelmed with despair, she quickly turned the page of the family album. A dark-haired, gray-eyed baby boy. Susan gently stroked the photograph. What an affectionate and bright little guy her son had been. Only God knew what it cost her to raise him alone. Susan served 18 months before being released on parole. The young woman was incredibly fortunate that her child wasn't taken away. But out in the world, a torrent of problems came crashing down on her. No one wanted to hire a single mom with a kid, especially an ex-con. Thank goodness her neighbor Jake pulled some strings through an adult student of his to get little Jacob into daycare. Now, Susan could work tirelessly. She was a janitor at a restaurant, did evening office cleanings, spent weekends detailing cars at a car wash, and sewed pillowcase covers overnight. Susan didn't dwell on the past. What was the point in reopening old wounds? While she was locked up, all her old connections had been severed. She once ran into an old friend who told her that Steve from the roadside cafe had gone bankrupt. Mayor Benson had taken a promotion and moved his family to D.C., and his son had married a D.C. socialite a year ago. Susan cried all night, then dried her tears and went back to mopping restaurant floors. Her only joy and concern now was raising her son. Dawn was breaking outside. Had Susan really spent the whole night poring over the photo album? She lay down to sleep, but thoughts of her son kept her awake. She had always tried so hard to give him nice things. An expensive toy, a tasty treat, some stylish new clothes. She was willing to bust her butt to fulfill his every wish, within reason, of course. If Jacob wanted the latest gadget, he calmly told his mom, knowing she would find the money somehow. If needed, she'd take on an extra cleaning job at yet another office. Of course, Susan had to take some blame for raising such a self-centered egotist. She never complained to him about being tired, never took a sick day, always gave him the biggest portion at meals. No wonder the boy never stopped to think about the price his mother paid to put food on the table. And now her own son was ashamed of her, didn't want some lousy janitor at his wedding ceremony. How demoralizing. Susan sighed bitterly, then turned to the portrait of Jacob hanging on the wall. "Son, for 25 years I bent over backwards for you, but this time I'm going to do what I want. Forgive me. The woman got up and took a small box out of her nightstand where she old-fashionedly kept her cash savings. Plus, her monthly paycheck was still in the bank. It would be enough for a new outfit, hair, and makeup. Susan's appearance at the wedding ceremony caused quite a stir. She had always looked youthful, but after her salon visit, she seemed to have shed a decade. The gentlemen guests couldn't help sneaking glances at the slim, blonde woman in the gorgeous blue dress. During the ceremony, the mother proudly watched her serious, slightly nervous son and his lovely bride, discreetly wiping away tears. She was so glad she had come. After the guests congratulated the newlyweds, Jacob slipped through the crowd over to his mother and hissed, "So my request meant nothing, huh? I hope you're not planning to come to the reception." "No, I won't," Susan nodded. "I've seen everything I wanted to see." "Hello there." Ashley, flushed with happiness, bounced over. "Susan, you look incredible. My parents are inviting you to join them at the reception." "Thanks, but I should get going," Susan declined. "Get going? But Jacob, it's your own mother's son getting married." Forcing a smile, Jacob invited his mom to the reception. When it came time for the parents' toasts, Susan took the microphone. "Kids, be happy. Love each other for life." Despite her brief words, Susan's sincerity brought a standing ovation from the guests. As she stepped off the small stage, Susan nearly collided with a tall man in an expensive suit. His face looked familiar. "It can't be. It can't be," Mark echoed, blocking her path. "Susan, is that you?" "What are you doing here, Mark?" Susan couldn't believe her eyes. "The father of the bride is my business partner. He invited me." Mark fidgeted nervously as he took Susan's hand. "Maybe we could step aside and talk?" "You're alone? No wife?" "I've been divorced for 10 years now, no kids." They talked for an hour. Mark explained how his father had flown out and told him Susan had met another man and moved to D.C. with him. Devastated, Mark didn't believe his dad at first. He was worried about insulting Susan with baseless accusations, so he first tried to get the truth from his best friend. The buddy went to the roadside cafe but couldn't find Susan there. The owner and waitresses all corroborated the story Mark's father had told. "I nearly went insane with grief back then," Mark said. "I stayed in England another 6 months, then returned to D.C. My dad had been promoted and remarried. Was I ever really happy all those years? Not for a minute, except when I was young with you." He looked at Susan. "So how did you spend this time?" "Let's not dwell on the sad stuff," Susan suggested. "It's a wedding after all. I'll tell you everything later, but for now, ask me to dance." The guests couldn't take their eyes off the graceful older couple waltzing together. Jacob watched his mother, hardly recognizing her. He suddenly realized his mom was a very attractive woman, still quite young, who had sacrificed her personal life to raise him alone. For the first time, Jacob felt truly ashamed. Then he noticed his mom leaving arm in arm with some rich guy and caught up to them on the steps. "Mom, where are you going?" "Leaving. Isn't that what you wanted?" his mother reminded him. "Mom, I'm sorry, but where are you going with this man?" "I'm ready to go to the ends of the earth with this man," Susan said sincerely. "By the way, meet your father." Jacob and Mark stared at Susan in shock. After a moment, she resolutely shook her head and smiled. "I think the three of us are going to have a very long, difficult conversation ahead of us."